Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this second session of the second day of the 4-day international conference on Ecocriticism, Theory and Praxis, organized by the Department of English of Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Autonomous, Narendrapur, as a part of the Diamond Jubilee celebrations of the college. It is a proud privilege for the department to be able to host celebrated scholars of national and international repute on this digital platform. The opening session yesterday was enriched by a wonderfully illuminating keynote address by Professor Swarnalata Rangarajan. Professor Rangarajan's talk was titled From Nature with N in uppercase to Nature in lowercase. Ecocriticism and the Anthropocene imperative. It was followed by yet another scintillating lecture by Professor Pramod K. Nair of University of Hyderabad. His lecture was titled Toxic Nature and Biocultural Precarity. And in today's first session, we had the privilege to host Professor Shen Xiangzhen of Shandong University, China. Professor Shen spoke on contemporary global ecoaesthetics. In this second session of the conference, we have with us two of the very celebrated scholars on this part of the world. It is an honor to host Professor Sharmishta Chatterjee of Alia University, Kolkata, and my colleague, our very own Sri Bidhu Chand Murmu of Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Narendrapur. On behalf of the department and the college, I extend a warm welcome to both our speakers. Before I formally introduce the speakers to our audiences, I'd like to propose that we will have the lectures one after another, and at the end of the second lecture, we will take the questions together for both the speakers. The participants are requested to write their questions and observations in the chat box of YouTube. Let me introduce our first speaker this evening. Dr. Sharmishta Chatterjee is an associate professor in the Department of English of Alia University, Kolkata, West Bengal. Her area of interest include South Asian literature, translation studies, post-colonialism, partition, eco-criticism, gender studies, modern linguistics, and English language teaching. Dr. Chatterjee has been the trainer associate from 2007 to 2013 in the UGC program, Capacity Building for Women Managers in Higher Education. She has authored and edited books on translation and translation studies, post-colonialism and language studies. This apart, she has published widely in the national and international books and journals. Her book titled Language and Power, a study of the works of Amitabh Ghosh, has been published by Lambert, Germany. She has also edited an anthology of translated short stories titled Missing Links, Stories from Bengal and Beyond. Her recent publications include Travel Writing, Travel in Writing, co-edited with Dr. Tajuddin Ahmed, published by Vishwakosh Parishad. Her latest book on English communication has been published by Cambridge, UK. She has also contributed a chapter on Bengal partition and the role of wandering minstrels in the anthology, border and bordering, poetics, politics, precariousness, edited by Stuttgart and Hanover, Epidemic Press. We're also joined by my colleague Bidhu Chandra Murmu. He is an assistant professor in the Department of English of Ramakrishna Residential College, Narendrapur, and also a PhD candidate at the Department of English of Presidency University. His areas of interest include ecocriticism, post-colonialism, Dalit and subaltern studies, and contemporary literary studies, and also romantic poetry. So we begin this business session first with Professor Sharmishta Chatterjee. She will be speaking on the subject of ecofeminism, and it will be followed by Professor Bidhu Chandra Murmu, his talk on post-colonial ecocriticism. With this, I would like to request Professor Chatterjee to kindly deliver her lecture. It's over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Pranab. Am I audible?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Thank you for this. Yes. Thank you for this very kind introduction, and a very good evening to everyone. I feel privileged and honored, and I would say also humbled to be able to speak at this 4-day international conference on eco-criticism organized by Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Narendrapur. I express my gratitude to the authorities and the management of the college, the Department of English, and especially Pranab, my very dear young friend, all of whom have invited me to share my thoughts at this platform. Today, as told to you, I speak on ecofeminism, and the title of my talk is Nature Under Western Eyes, Two Different Perspectives. If I am to give you in a nutshell what am I going to talk about, I would first begin with a sort of a summary of how ecocriticism began and how it is laden with controversies in the recent times, the accusations against it, and what are the accusations against it, therefore its limitation, its scope. And then I go on to present to you a couple of case studies, equally weighed on both sides, apart, or a couple of case studies from the West, especially America, where eco-criticism began as a pioneering study, and weighed by, on this side, a couple of studies from the East, where we have two Bengali women, and we have an Indian woman, very known to you, a very known name, you will see, and then followed by a case study from Africa. And on the basis of the case studies, I argue, as I have titled my talk, Two Different Perspectives. I argue that in the West and the East, when women are thinking about nature and their interaction and their negotiation with nature, although the objectives are the same, it's never a homogeneous interaction. And the West and the East can think differently. The issues are different. The priorities are different. So the women are also engaged in those priorities differently. But yes, somewhere, you see, when they think together, the women definitely think about a better world, a balanced environment, and a better perspective, ecological perspective. So that is what I'm going to, in a nutshell, try to put forth today evening. And if I may begin with You see, the real ecofeminism, which has its origins, strictly speaking, in the 1980s, began with, as most of the students know, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, 1962. And it has emerged from the intersections of feminist research, various movements for social justice and environmental health, explorations that uncovered the linked oppressions of ecology, gender, uh, race, species, and nation through such foundational texts. Very known texts, Suzanne Griffin's Woman and Nature, 1978, and Carolyn Merchant's The Death of Nature, 1980. An early text of radical feminism, Mary Daly's Gin, or Gin as you would call Gyno, from their Ecology, 1978, exposed the historical and the cross-cultural persecution of women as legitimized by various male-dominated institutions of religion, culture, and medical science. And she cites examples of, say, Indian sati, Chinese foot binding, like, say, that Chinese women are made to wear very small shoes so that their feet do not grow in size. So that's shocking. American African genital mutilation, where you see women are robbed of the pleasures, sexual pleasures. European witch burnings, American gynecology, and Nazi medicine, which is discriminatory. So linking the physical health of women, so I continue with, Dali's ideas. So she links the physical health of women and the environment with the recuperation of a woman-centered language and thought. Griffin's Woman and Nature predates today's gender studies in its exploration of the ways that the feminized status of women, animals, nature, and feminized others. By feminized, she essentially means persecuted, discriminated, feminized status of, say, others' children, people of color, farmers, slaves, as well as the body itself, emotions, and sexuality, has been conceived of as a separate and inferior in order to legitimate their subordination under the elite and often very violent and militarized male dominant order. Bridging socialist feminism and ecology, socialist feminism, which will essentially say that women's work often becomes domestic work, especially often becomes unpaid labor. And therefore, no matter how much work the women do, they never contribute to the GDP, they never contribute to the economy. So you see, these are the concerns of socialist feminism and what we would also say Marxist ecofeminism. So bridging socialist feminism and ecology, Merchant's Death of Nature provided historical documentation for the claim that domination of women and nature have shared roots in the logic of science and capitalism, an intertwining of economics and rationalism that Merchant traces from 1484 to 1716. Most provocative is her intersectional linkage of racism, speciesism, sexism, colonialism, capitalism, and the mechanistic model of science, nature via the historical co-occurrence of the racist and the colonialists, I quote, voyages of discovery. And I think everybody knows the voyages of discovery would essentially mean, plundering and looting the bowels of the earth, as Conrad has famously said, and also, looking and discriminating against the women. So the voyages of discovery that resulted in appropriating indigenous peoples, animals, and the land. The 3 centuries of European witch burnings, eradicating women herbalists and midwives, along with animal experimentation, the demise of midwifery, and the rise of Western medical science, all functioning as illicit appropriations of self-determinism, power, and wealth from indigenous people, women, queer, animals, and nature to elite men. Going beyond the findings of Griffin and Dali, Merchant documented historical research provided a materialist feminist foundation for activism, and theorizing of ecofeminism in the 1980s and beyond. Outside of the United States, materialist foundations were also laid down by early German and Australian ecofeminists, and these names are famous to you, like Maria Mais, who is very famous for also ecofeminism, 1986, and Ariel Saleh, 1984. It is this human-centered, that is anthropocentric feminism that has come to dominate feminist thinking in the new millennium, effectively marginalizing feminism's relevance. The global crisis of climate justice, food security, energy justice, vanishing wildlife, maldevelopment, habitat loss, industrial animal food production, and more have simultaneously shown social and ecological dimensions that require both ecological and feminist analysis. Ecofeminists, it is argued, have listened to their feminist social ecologists, deep ecological and environmental critics. So you see, they have grown. In fact, they have grown, they have responded, they have taken more issues and more crises into their ambit. But critics, as I was telling you in the beginning when I was trying to argue or trying to put the argument of my lecture, critics have been harsh. The charges against ecofeminists as essentialists, so the charges that they find in everything their own self and their discrimination and their domination. So ethnocentric, anti-intellectual goddess worshippers who mistakenly portray the earth as female, or issue totalizing and ahistorical mandates for worldwide veganism. These sweeping generalizations have been made, and often made without specific and supporting documentation, and have been disproven again and again in the pages of academic and popular journals, at conferences, and in conversation. Yet, the contamination lingers. Now, having therefore laid bare the scope, the problems, and also the limitations of ecofeminism in a nutshell, as a way of thought, I proceed to discuss, as I told you, certain case studies. A few from the West, particularly American, and from the East. The East, what Ramachandra Guha would call the third world environmentalism. All these case studies concern women and how they have responded to nature. So basically, I talk to you about the contamination, the controversy, and whether you see these case studies have been able to answer the controversy in which ecofeminism has been engaged. Okay. I also share with you, Greta Gards, and she is a very, very well-known ecofeminist, and I hear that she was supposed to give a talk if it was possible, but she's heavily engaged, and she was asked in a conference, that what are the ecofeminists doing right now, and you see, there were talks in the conference that they are basically doing nothing, and no contribution whatsoever. So these case studies would try to probe into whether there is any contribution, and they also span over almost a century. Some are, say, early 1930s, and then coming down to, say, 1990s. So let's see, what are these women doing and how are they engaging with nature. So such studies would refer to different times and periods and help us to understand pertinent issues that have kept both Western and Eastern women preoccupied. Such studies establish not only the fact that women could and did respond to nature beyond spiritual engagement. Spiritual engagement, by spiritual engagement, again, the kind of allegation that has been made against such engagement is that it has been going back to very indigenous worships which have no scientific basis, and those which have been explored by ecofeminists like Vandana Shiva. So they did, women could and did respond to nature beyond a spiritual engagement, but also the truth that women's interaction with nature was not a homogeneous affair. So most earlier studies of American response to nature have focused on men, with a characteristic conclusion that, and I quote, wilderness is a place for defining virility, for playing out aggressive, adventure-seeking, sometimes violent impulses, unquote. And I quote this from Vera L. Norwood. Women's responses to nature have been given attention only very recently, perhaps following the belief in the words of Sherry Ortner, and I quote, but that they are closer to nature than men, unquote. And then again I quote, and not just the belief that women are nature. So it's not, the idea, metaphorical idea that women are nature. So not that, it's beyond, okay? Although Ortner's claims can be challenged, its limitations stem from the fact of women's denial of access to an untamed environment. So if there are lesser case studies, it is because of the sheer fact that women are, because of social inhibitions, women are not allowed to go in search of the wild. So this is, in fact, very passionately argued for men, but not for women. But those who got a chance, those women who got a chance, did contribute and develop feminine environmental ethics. I begin with a study of Isabella Bird, B-I-R-D, who had made a celebratory journey to the Rocky Mountains in the fall and the winter of 1873. So this begins, back in, as I told you, in the earlier century. As Daniel Burstein and others have pointed out, she was not an explorer, yet she earned the respect of the geographers of her times. She is one of the few Victorian women travelers whose works continue to be read today. And the name of her work is A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains. And it is a series of letters Bird wrote to her sister during her visit. Her objective was clear: to experience the wilderness on her own terms. So she did not have a lot of, theory as a backing, but she just wanted to experience. At the bottom of this determination to visit the Rockies is prompted by her need for religious solitude. She constantly attempts to get far away from cities and settlements so that she can experience nature alone. In many of her letters prior to her arrival in Estates Park, expresses her lamentation at her inability to escape from a variety of protectors and escorts. I would ask you to please note this. Women during that time had to be escorted, even if they were going or traveling. It reveals a typically feminine sentiment and a frustration at being so close to wilderness, yet unable to find privacy in it. So I ask you to please note this difference in experience where a woman necessarily had to be guided in her travels. Bird is aware of the changing values of landscape in Europe between the 18th and the 19th century. For example, she makes a point of the disparaging scenery that imitates art and cautions her readers against assuming that Estes Park implies, I quote, park palings, well-lichened, a lodge with curtsying women, fellow deer, and a Queen Anne mansion, unquote. Now, this would remind you, a sort of a painting, which approximates, I would say, approximates nature. So all qualities of natural landscape, which were valued in the 18th century, where art was very important, culture was very important. Being an educated woman of her age, she glories in the romantic vistas that imply moral improvement in the beholder. I quote, nature, glorious, unapproachable, inimitable, raises one's thought reverently upwards towards her creator and ours. Grandeur and sublimity, not softness, are the features of Estes Park, unquote. Bird sisters are popular, however, because of the search for grand meditative setting, but which is never without its practical difficulties. Now, this is here where we might find something interesting. Now, what are the practical difficulties for her? Insects, snakes, grasshoppers, locusts, which were all rioting in a congenial environment. It is important that bird is not interested in biophysical environment. So you see, bird is interested in definitely, the physical, but not in the strict sense of the sense, the biophysical. Or you see settlers like destruction miners who are invading and who, according to her, are wreaking, WREAKING, wreaking on the geological and biological landscape, unquote. In other words, they are, I quote again, hard, unloving, unrelieved, unbeautified, grinding, unquote. So she's careful to separate her role as a traveler from the one participating in the frontier adventures of commodity development in the West. Bird is idiosyncratic in the sense that she is tolerant of people like solitary mountain men. So she would tolerate men who do not interfere with nature. So solitary mountain men who merely blend with it but do not try to change the landscape. She therefore does not go to the West to civilize the land. So this is very important. One of the thoughts of the West, that leave the wilderness free. Rather, she chooses to search and explore the wilderness in all its purity. In rejecting classes of people and classes of creatures engaging in creating life on the landscape, she becomes a contrast, we will see later, to Rani Chando. I'll be talking about Rani Chando afterwards, a pilgrim traveler of the East. So, with this, we think about bird, therefore, as a traveler, essentially trying to preserve the purity of wilderness and enjoying and appreciating it for its own sake. With this, we move on to Mary Austin, who took up writing her famous book, The Land of Little Rain, about 15 years later in 1886. This is based on her family's dryland farming in the St. Joaquin Valley and the rest of her life, which was spent in the Southwest. But she decides to repudiate Isabella Bird's heartlessness. She was supremely concerned between the geologic and the biophysical landscape, including in the latter human beings. Austin seeks to resolve the conflict between nature and culture by overcoming hierarchical traditions in Western culture that imply the desert is a wasteland, snakes are evil, and man controls nature. So these were the conventions before Austin starts to question, interrogate them, and negotiate with them. One of the early essays in The Land of Little Rain contains it's titled, in fact, Water Trails of the Ceriso, which is remarkable for its loving description of the wildlife of the desert and its chronicle of the dependence of animals on the scarce water. So what I'm trying to project over here is that her departure from Bird's philosophy, observation, and belief. For Bird, beauty can be found in the mountain terrain. For Austin, in the desolate colors of the desert. Austin values the challenges of nature not for magnificent views, which seeing them provides, but in themselves, for the effect they produce and the interactions they reveal. She writes a great deal about people who are successful at living in the desert on its terms, finding examples in independent prospectors, American Indians, and Hispanic communities, thereby taking a totally different approach, valuing their alternate approach to the development of American landscape, natural and cultural. Although Austin seems less disturbed than Bird by the peopling, quote unquote, of this land, she's disturbed. She's disturbed in a deeper manner. She hints at the coming destruction of the wilderness. As she ruefully notes, and I quote, "There is an economy of nature, but with it all there is not sufficient account taken of the works of men. There is no scavenger that eats tin cans, and no wild thing leaves a like disfigurement on the forest floor, unquote. So she is, in a way, at the back of her mind thinking, about the possibilities of the destruction of the wilderness. In many ways, Austen's attitude to Jimville precedes the environmentalism of the poor in the disadvantaged third world. We will come to that in the second part. Now, we all know about Rachel Carson. Her Silent Spring, she's best remembered for that and her indignation of the life-destroying potential of pesticides. But you see, she was already an established and well-respected naturalist due to her earlier book, The Sea Around Us, a study of the oceans. So Bird earlier was studying the mountains. Austen engages with the desert, and Carson is now engaging with the oceans. And this book was published in 1951. So we are coming down slightly in the timeline. The book was so popular and very interesting, it was difficult to keep in stock. This is also interesting. But many readers were surprised and that a woman could write such a comprehensive and quote-unquote scientific book. Very significantly, Carson received fan mails assuming that she was a male, or implying that if she were a woman, she must be a very old woman to know so much about the ocean. So something like, telling a story, the Thakumar Jhuli story about the ocean. So she must be a very old woman, but the Carson was at that time only around in her early 40s. So Carson echoes Austen definitely when she writes, and I quote, "It is impossible to understand man without understanding his environment and the forces that have molded him physically and mentally," unquote. And I am reminded of, one of the very popular poems of Jayanto Mohapatra, where, he says that a man sits by the environment, drops a stone, and he becomes the land on which he is sitting. So, the inexplicable ties between the man and his environment. Moving on, Carson, writing 40 years later, committed to a life of science, was concerned not whether we should accept the knowledge science brings, but how best to use it. So this is different and definitely a development from Bird and Austen. While Bird marvels only at the glorious vistas and thundering wildlife, and Austen gives the scavengers and snakes of the world a certain charm, Carson, benefiting from advances in research, offers a whole new pantheon of heroic creatures. So Carson's scientific knowledge definitely gives her an edge. And I quote page 19 of Sea Around Us from there. Hordes of small carnivores in plankton, the human eye difficulty seeing at all. Human eye, has difficulty seeing at all, unquote. Yet the sea around us also reveals a deep concern with the hubris attached to the discovery, like that of the chronicle of human destruction of islands, far more precision and concern than either earlier writer could. Bird takes solace of escape in exotic lands, Austen in the rosy mist of reminiscence, but Carson finds wonder in the actual experience. She realizes that although the growth of civilization destroys the environment, but only through increased knowledge, and which is a product of civilization, can destruction be stopped. So while Carson predicts towards, the end of her book, the Puritans' fear of God's potential abandonment, this is something which she talks about, blight, pestilence, also those who have read Silent Spring, similar kind of imagery, okay, which talks about, sort of an apocalyptic universe. So here also, she talks about the fear of God's potential abandonment and banishment into a howling wilderness void of life. Annie Dillard, this is the next, the last case in the West, Annie Dillard's pilgrim at Tinker Creek and this is 1980, begins with a classic vision of uncertainty about the American landscape. She asks, are we in Eden or the desert? She provides a contemporary voice speaking responsibility to God in the natural environment that the Puritans brought with them to wild America. In a different vein, Dillard's primary concern is her individual, personal relationship to God and nature. Something definitely which aligns her to the eco-spiritualists, against which many of the contemporary theorists have a lot to say. One critic has described Dillard's work as that which brings, and I quote, an artist's eye, a scientist's curiosity, a metaphysician's mind, all woven together in what might be called, essentially, a theologian's quest, unquote. Her world and Austin's are based on the hope that there is a fit, that means a congruence, between natural demands and adaptations to those demands. Circumstances change and organic forms change to meet them. The problem is to understand the fit. That means to solve the puzzle of the cosmos. Okay? Yet the mysteries, the unanswered questions seem to expand. Carson wants to move towards solving pieces of mystery because Carson has that very, very scientific training. Dillard is content with the quality of the mystery itself. I quote, the point is not that it fits together like clockwork, for it doesn't particularly, not even inside the fishbowl. That means absolutely microcosm, small, not even inside the fishbowl, but that it flows so freely, wild, like the creek, like it surges in such a free tangle. Freedom is the world's water and weather, the world's nourishment freely given, its soil and sap. And the creator loves pizzazz. Pizzazz mishmash, the puzzle. Okay? This is from page 140. Therefore, you see, feminine consciousness characteristically defines nature in a much more, quote, immanent fashion. Okay? That means nature everywhere. Okay? So nature is before culture. So before culture, there was nature, and after culture, there will continue to be nature. Their cultural drama is not one of successful challenge, nature overcome. There would mean women's, but full of recognition, nature comprehended. Women's tales are filled not with dominance, but with humility that forfeits the individual voice so that nature can speak. However, as a contrast to the first world women's tryst with nature, I discuss a few more women of South Asia, some of them who have written and some of them who are activists. But they have shown different sensibilities in their interaction with nature. Yet in each of these studies, like Western models, it is the nature that speaks. So in this, both the worlds are united. Of particular interest would be the Bengali pilgrimage narrative, Kedarbodri Bhroman Kahini, by the courageous 70-year-old pilgrim Rajlokhi Debba in 1935. Intended to be an arduous pilgrimage, the description of landscape can captivate the reader's attention. For instance, when the pilgrim turns to shifting colors of the peaks on the breathtaking view of the snow-clad mountains. And I quote, all the mountains seem decorated with the bouquet of flowers. The slopes here are full of flowering trees. The more we progress, the more I notice to the profusion of flowers from the beginning to the end. There are only white blossoms. A few red ones can also be observed. There are no black flowers at all. This seems to be like God's own throne. You'll be reminded of Dillard, surrounded on four sides by flowers. He knows his glory best, unquote. In Gorur Choti, the author sees the deeply perturbed other pilgrims who are anxious about a langur, who could carry away their belongings. But the writer assures us that the creature never touched any of their belongings, like Austin and Dillard. Here is a human who is deeply empathetic about all creatures of earth. In a similar vein, Rani Chando's pilgrimage narratives, Purnokumbho 1952 and Himadri 1956, about 15-18 years later, reveal her deep fellowship with birds. Although the Chhatari birds with their misshapen bodies do not deserve a second glance from most people, Chando wonders at their status in the circles of avian hierarchy. I think I have time. I was just, taking a note of the time. Yes, I do have time. Sorry. So I continue then. I quote from Chando. In the multicolored variety of spring, in the soery of melodious choristers, where do the seven sisters stand? So these birds, seven sisters. Because of the universal neglect, they perhaps stay together in a close group. I have rushed at them with both my hands full of ammunition. This is at other times, she had tried to shoo away the birds. And I again go back to the quote. Today, what a miracle of Maya have the seven sisters created in my mind. They seem to be the perfect companions of the moment. Unquote. In small but unforgettable sketches, the painter pilgrim has recorded the details of honeybird with its slim, black but curved beaks, the birds astride the floating logs in the Ganges at Haridwar, the monkeys circling the last step of water body at Tribeni Ghat, Rani's intense feelings for a dead cat being dragged by a piece of torn sari at Varanasi is once again a proof of her empathy with all creatures, big or small. In Himadri, while on the way to Bishnu Prayag, Rani Chandro goes out of her way to undertake a prolonged search for a piteously bleating lamb trapped in the bushes of a sloping gorge. Like Dillard, Chando too finds God's grace in the simplicity and tenderness of nature. Bereft of any serious philosophies or theories, these indigenous early 20th century women travelers contribute aesthetically, I would say, spiritually and ethically to kinds of approaches to nature. Moving away from these nascent indigenous environmental consciousness of almost unknown women and the ecology of the affluent, we see environmentalism of the poor and two very remarkable women involved in it. And these two women are known, very well known. Such environmentalism interrogates the luxury of protecting wildernesses, but endorses the need to preserve natural habitat and elements which help the poor to survive. So when we are talking of differences, two different perspectives, these are two different perspectives, whether, to protect the wilderness, in a very essential companion to ecocriticism. Greg Gerard, devotes an entire chapter to conservation of the wilderness. So is that kind of conservation of the wilderness pertinent to the East? So might be there's a different perspective altogether. What Ramchandra Guha or Erika Kudworth, would argue about. So is there a need to endorse, the wilderness, or to preserve the natural habitat and elements which help the poor to survive? So the Sardar Sarovar Dam being built on the Narmada River in central India had the promise of standing as a showpiece of Indian economic development. It's known to all. The dam would have provided much needed irrigation and electricity, but it would have submerged historical old temples, rich deciduous forests, and at least 250 villages. The potential ousties came together under the banner of Narmada Bachao Andolon, led by a then 40-year-old woman, Medha Patkar. In a bid to stop dam construction, Patkar and her colleagues fasted outside provincial legislatures, camped outside the minister's house, and walked through the Narmada Valley to raise awareness of the predicament of the to-be displaced villagers. And we all know the fate, what had happened. The last illustration is one of environmental reconstruction rather than protest. This is Kenya's Greenbelt movement, founded by Wangari Maathai, an anatomist schooled at the University of Kansas, who became her country's first women professor. In 1977, Maathai threw up her university position to motivate other less privileged women to protect and improve their environment. Starting with a mere 7 saplings planted on June 5th, 1977, World Environment Day, the movement had by 1992 distributed 7 lakh saplings planted and cared for by a group of village women spread over 22 districts of Kenya. The Greenbelt movement, writes the journalist Fred Pierce, has, and I quote him, arguably done more to stall the expansion of deserts and destruction of soils in Africa than its big brother, international body down the road, the United Nations Environmental Programme, with its grand but largely unsuccessful anti-desertification programs. Unquote. The last 2 examples are one of environmental activism. I did not definitely talk about books, but this is also, a part of ecofeminism today, active environmentalism. To the struggles against environmental degradation, there are struggles for environmental renewal too. The numerous and growing efforts by rural communities in Asia and Africa to better manage their forests, conserve their soil, sustainably harvest the water, and use energy-saving devices like improved stoves and biogas plants. We began today's discussion by laying bare the serious allegations against ecofeminists being essentialists, ethnocentric, anti-intellectual goddess worshippers, who mistakenly portray the earth as female or issue totalizing and historical mandates for worldwide veganism. The case studies cited across the century over is an effort basically to disprove such a claim that ecofeminism is no longer an essential, viable, and a contributory branch of study and movement. I would say that it has thrived, and it continues to thrive in its humble, ethical, and practical yet heterogeneous attempt, both in theory and praxis, to sustain and build world environment and ecology. Thank you. Over to Pranab.
Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am, for so thoroughly guiding us to an understanding of the development of studies in ecofeminism in wide contexts, and also for textually relating the ever persistent issues related to the studies of feminist criticism to the discourse of ecological studies. Through your focus on feminist activism related to ecological preservation in the world context and detailed theoretical positions, you have opened up new horizons before us, and you have certainly motivated us to engage in serious researches on ecofeminism. May I now request the second speaker of this session, Sri Bibhuchand Murmu, to present his lecture, after which we will take the questions together for both of our speakers. Thank you, ma'am. So, Bibhu, I request you to make your presentation now.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible, Bibhu. You are audible.
Very good evening to all, and one of the thank you for this opportunity.
Bibhu, could you be a little louder?
Now it is audible?
Yes, it's better.
And thank you, ma'am, for your enlightened lecture, because it will help me a lot in my study. because of its direct connection with my study. The topic I want to discuss is the perspective of post-colonial theories or studies in eco-criticism or eco-critical field. But before that,
Sorry for the interruption. Vidhu, please try to be little louder. Uh, I
is
mean,
it audible now?
it's better. Can
I
you
think
be little?
due to network issue.
Yeah, maybe. But yes, yes.
Am I
Please go
audible now?
ahead. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
it's better. It's better. Thank you.
So the topic that I want to discuss is the perspective of post-colonial studies in eco-criticism or eco-critical field. But before that, I want to go through a brief description, an introductory description on eco-criticism. It is true that we live in a world where environmental degradation has become a natural phenomenon. Industrialization, modern development, biochemical engineering, globalization have accelerated the degradation of the environment. Now, literature, as a mirror of society, has raised its voice many times against the destruction of nature throughout history. A school of criticism that emerged around mid 20th century as a reaction against this destruction of environment that came to be known as eco-criticism. So this eco-criticism, as elaborated by Cyril Gottfeldt in the Eco-Criticism Reader, and I quote, the relationship between literature and physical environment. So eco-criticism is a criticism from environmental point of view. It is a study that concerns about the representation of environment in cultural text. But eco-criticism as a term, first introduced by William Rickert in an essay known as Literature in Ecology, an Experiment in Eco-Criticism, published in 1978. But the thing that I want to discuss is about post-colonial perspective in eco-criticism or environmental study. So here we have two fields of studies side by side. One is post-colonialism and another is eco-criticism. Apparently both are different from each other as far as post-colonial theory concern or post-colonial study concern. It focuses on the representation of the history of colonial empire and its effect on human and culture. It is a study to protest the very process of colonization or imperialism. On the other hand, eco-criticism is a study of environment. Now the point is, why to bring them together? Eco-criticism as a field of study, as I told you earlier, that emerged around 1978 as a reaction against overemphasis on modernization or development or industrialization. In UK, the tendency of eco-critical writing were quite alarming in tone, that is, a concern about degradation of nature. In the USA, the tone was quite celebratory, that is, a study that focuses on the exoticization of environment, or better to say, tree hugging. Whatever, as a reaction against over importance on anthropocentric views or anthropocentrism, the activists or environmentalists of the West started focusing on conservation of nature or giving nature the first priority. This gesture is again linked to the idea of a deep ecology. It believes in the notion of earth first, a philosophy established by R. Nace around 1970s. So it is how a study of environment look like in Western countries or in developed countries. But when it comes to the study of the environment of underdeveloped countries or the countries that were former colonies of the Western power, or better to say, third world countries, the study of the environment of the West or North is inadequate to bring justice here. Generally, third world countries or the discourse of environment in third world countries are not uniform. Countries of third world are still entangled with subsistence agriculture, traditional technology, over population, social inequality. So these are environmentalism of the poor. Ramchandra Guha and Jamaat earlier in environmentalism of the poor have argued about it. So environmentalism of the poor emphasizes on the sustainable living, equal distribution of wealth or resources, and not just a distribution of resources but also control over them. And along with it, the role of women is also important in the discourse of environment in third world countries. Now come to post-colonialism. As a field of study, it dismantles the dominant narrative or canon of colonial history. So when this notion of a dismantling or a deconstruction comes into the field of eco-criticism, it helps critics or activists from third world to dismantle the Euro-American policy of environment. Or in other way, I can say that the study of post-colonialism would be incomplete without having a study of the environment. If we see the history of colonialism, we will find that the very idea of colonialism started with the idea of capturing a land. So colonization is not just about capturing people and culture of a certain geographical region or country, but it is also about the land or environment. There is a book by Robert Young, Empire, Colony, and Post-Colony, where he argues about three types of colony: settler colony, exploitation colony, and garrison colony. Now, settler colony refers to those countries where a group of people go and settle there. Garrison colony, on the other hand, refers to the fort and naval base colony. Now, third world countries are basically exploitation colony, like few Asian countries, African countries, and Latin American, which were used as the supplier of resources to support the modernization or industrialization of the West. So the environment as well as human were exploited for their purpose. The study of post-colonialism and eco-criticism are both necessary when one tries to have a full understanding of the environment of third world countries, or I can say post-colonial study is incomplete without having a proper knowledge about environment. So together, post-colonial and eco-criticism is an interdisciplinary field of study. To many critics or activists in third world, there is a strong link between social, economic justice, ecology, and environment. In a post-colonial eco-criticism, Graham Hoogan and Helen Tiffin argues or mentioned Ramchandra Guha's argument of bringing post-colonialism and eco-criticism together. I quote, as a means of challenging the continuing imperialistic mode of social and environmental dominance. While both are suggesting that at the same time, post-colonial and ecological are co-optable for a national and transnational corporate capitalist concern, unquote. Again, they argued post-colonial studies have come to understand environmental issues not only as central to the project of European conquest and global domination, but also as inherent in the ideology of imperialism and racism on which those projects historically and persistently depend, unquote. The line continuing imperialistic mode of dominance is important here. Though third world countries are not official colony of Western developed countries at present, but the idea or ideology of colonialism or dominance, exploitation is still present today. Earlier it were Western exploitation and dominance, but at present various projects and policies of government or state or multinational corporation carry on the same ideology of imperialism. There is a book by Bill Ashcroft and Helen Tiffin known as The Empire Writes Back, Theories and Practice in Post-Colonial Literature, where the idea of imperialism is argued beautifully. The ideology of dominance starts embedding into the mind of the native people since the time of colonization. A colonial master brings with them their culture apart from domination and exploitation. So a preoccupation of thought is always present since the time of colonization. The other thing that a colonial master brings with them, like their culture, various non-indigenous species that not only bring harmness towards indigenous people, their mind, culture, but also alters them too. So whatever we are today, I can say we are still following the footprints of the Western ideology in every field. There is a book by Pablo Mukherjee that is Post-Colonial Environment, and I quote, "A backward country assimilate the material and intellectual conquest of the advanced countries. But that doesn't mean it follows them slavishly, reproduces all the stages of their past. The privileges of the historic backwardness permits the adaptation of whatever is ready in advance of any specific data." Unquote. So he argued it from the perspective of socio-economy. And I think this is the reason, that is why modernization, development, or industrialization in post-colonial countries or third world countries are seen as a disguised form of neocolonialism or imperialism that only serves the purpose of certain group or people. As I told earlier, that in third world countries, because of social inequality, poverty, any modernization like conservation of forest, which is again linked to the idea of deep ecology, or deforestation to support modern lifestyle, construction like construction of dam, power plant, mining, biochemical engineering, not only bring harmness towards environment, but bring injustices to certain community or people. Especially those are underprivileged, or basically the tribal community. That is why the study of post-colonialism and eco-criticism is necessary to protest the ideology of a neocolonialism or imperialism. Now the main thing is, what would be the areas of concern if one approaches post-colonialism and eco-criticism together? First thing, most post-colonial eco-critic argue about the various policies of conservation by state or government. To them, the conservation of forest or certain geographical region for its biodiversity is to refute the life form of certain community, especially those underprivileged or tribal community, who are directly dependent on the land for their basic resources. For example, the conservation of Sundarban forest as a national park to preserve wildlife, or better to say the Royal Bengal tiger in 1984. Now, this policy of government resulted in the forceful displacement or evacuation of ecosystem people. Now, ecosystem people refers to those who are directly dependent on a particular geographical region. Here, basically the Rohingyas or migrant from Myanmar or the Dalit classes. Now, this policy has jeopardized their basic livelihood, where they are directly dependent on this particular region to have fish, wood, honey, and other necessities. This policy of government have done no good to these ecosystem people, rather than disrupting the balance that existed between this human and the non-human nature. In Amitabh Ghosh's Hungry Tide, they are a proper manifestation of these refugees and the tension between human and non-human in their struggle to survive. Not just such policies, other things like strategic plantation of cash crops like sugarcane, coffee, tea, rubber, etc. Or on the other hand, deforestation to support modern development or modernization has its bad impact on certain community or people. So together, post-colonial eco-critic argue against imperial conservation policy, strategic plantation, gardening, forceful selling or seizing of land, etc. Next areas of concern would be various national and international project of development or industrialization, like a construction of power plant, mining, urbanization, dam, etc. Now you might think that I'm using the term development again and again. It may sound evil to any post-colonial eco-critic, but the thing that post-colonial eco-critics are concerned about is whether a development sustainable or not, or whether the fruit of any development reaches every section of society or not. But the irony is that the fruit of development in post-colonial nation is very less to certain community or hardly reaches them. So post-colonial eco-critics see the link between poverty and ecological destruction and the risk towards them from development. Again, a post-colonial eco-critic see the displacement due to modern development or displaced psyche or internally displaced people as a consequence of development. So a native agenda of politics like a resistance movement, a role of women in ecological issues, their culture, history, myth became areas of focus. And post-colonial eco-critics see how modernization or development affect them. The text that I want to talk about to elaborate my points is The Adivasi Will Not Dance by Hasta Sobhendra Shekhar. Sobhendra Shekhar is an Indian writer and won the Sahitya Akademi Yuva Puraskar for his book The Mysterious Element of Rupee Basket in 2015. But the book, come to the point, the book that I want to talk about is The Adivasi Will Not Dance is a collection of short stories. And the last one is titled as Adivasi Will Not Dance. The whole story is narrated from the perspective of a character named Mangal Murmu. He is a musician and head of a dance group. They perform their talents in various public shows to earn money. But behind the narrative of this tribal community of Jharkhand, there is another narrative of forceful displacement, evacuation from their land, or seizing of land by modern development projects like construction of power plant and mining industry. I quote, "Only a few of us still have farmland. Most of it have been acquired by mining company. If coal merchant have taken a part of our land, the other part has been taken over by stone merchant." Unquote. So apart from these, the construction of power plant in Goda district has completely evicted them from their land, as well as culture and identity, and deprived them from their basic subsistence that this community fetch from this land of Santal Pargana. I quote again, "The owners, they earn so much money from our land. They have big houses for themselves in town, get the best doctor in Ranchi, Kolkata. What do we Santals get in return? Tatters to wear, barely enough food. We cough blood and forever remain bare bone." So this is the situation when an underdeveloping country follows its footprints of Western development. Displacement and eviction is not just physical, but psychological also. They are internally displaced too, suffering from the lack of essence or life form that construct their identity. I quote again. We are losing our identity, our roots. Our music, our dance are sacred to us. But hunger and poverty has driven us to sell what is sacred to us. Even that too, this ignorant community has adopted for survival. But when they have nowhere to go, a notion of civil protest starts building in the form of not performing dance before the president of India of that time, Pranab Mukherjee, in inauguration ceremony of the power plant. I quoted, "How can you expect us to sing and dance when our families are uprooted from our village? We Adivasis will not dance." Unquote. So the socio-economic inequality not only bring harm to certain geographic region, but affect it in the same way done by Western colonial masters to non-Western countries. Next thing that post-colonial eco-critics are concerned about is the various intervention of modern biochemical experiment or invention. Modern chemical not only affect environment but also wipes out an entire species from nature. For example, the invention of DDT. Rachel Carson in her book Silent Spring talks about the harmful impact of DDT on environment. There is a chapter named "And No Bird Sing" portrays the extinction of robin is a bird, in few parts of England by eating worms poisoned by DDT sprayed in agricultural farmland. There is a pathetic image where the whole spring season has turned into silent person who has lost its song of spring. That is why it is silent spring. Such a biochemical, in turn, not only harm the environment but human too, and creates diseases like cancer, organ failures, and other kind of diseases, etc. due to the food chain. Few days back, I was reading an article on the banning of magur fish farming in India, published in Indian Express. In 2000, Indian government banned the import of magur fish from Thailand because of its harmful impact on indigenous varieties of fish, not only on fish but also on human body. Now, this magur fish was genetically engineered. It is generally larger in size, and it devours not only its own species but other species of its own region. So it is harmful for and there are few rackets still running under multinational company to fulfill their greed without giving a second thought to ecosystem. So this kind of colonization from the environmental point of view is known as biocolonialism. So not just this environment, the womb of women have become a land of commercialization. In an article, "The Social Paradox of Commercial Surrogacy in Developing Countries," published in BMC Women's Health, has argued about the commercialization of surrogacy performed by local women, basically from underdeveloping countries, for wealthy international individuals. Or I can say how native body is being used by international market, just like our native land were used by Western colonizer to support their modern development or modernization. So these are again known as bioprospect. Next thing that concern post-colonial eco-critics is the toxic waste. Generally, developing countries have a tendency to shift or settle their industries that are harmful or dangerous to the environment in underdeveloped countries, where pollution or degradation of the environment would not be the first concern because of poverty. So, developing countries take the advantage of poverty with a promise to facilitate them with modern necessities like education, job, good lifestyle, etc. But in the name of welfare, they ultimately damage more than they pay. Or the fruit of this industrialization or development only reach to certain wealthy classes or certain community. In 2018, a report was published in UN Environment Program where it was reported that, I quote, African nations have long been at the center of incidents involving hazardous waste dumping. In 2006, a cargo ship discharged 500 tons of toxic waste in Abidjan, a South African country, that killed 17 people and poisoned 1,000 more. Now you are quite acquainted with Ken Saro-Wiwa, who is well-known activist and environmentalist, who is known for his protest against the exploitation of Ogoni land and the waste dumping on Ogoni land by Royal Dutch Shell Company. So this exploitation of non-Western land by Western country is again known as the instance of environmental racism, where the idea of exploitation is based on the racist perspective, or where ecological crisis is linked to the racial politics. Next thing that postcolonial eco-critics are concerned about is bioregionalism. So bioregionalism is a concern towards a local environmental issues limited in a particular region. For example, that I argued about the issues of environment in Santal Parganas, a specific region of Jharkhand. So bioregionalism involves attention towards a local environment, including land, climate, native culture, myth, life form, etc. Mainly it works on a small territory and it sees how globalization and modernization affect their condition. A good example of bioregionalism would be Bhopal gas tragedy in 1984, where a chemical caused severe damage to an entire locality. So a postcolonial eco-critic, while having bioregional concern, see not just how certain thing causes harmful effect, but also the resistance movement or politics from local level. Now, it is quite evident that whatever we do, we cannot escape modernization or development. It is inevitable. In today's world, the issue of environmental degradation is not just a local issue. It is global now. For example, climate change, global warming, depletion of ozone layer, pollution. These are not limited to any region. Such kind of effect that work on a long and vast stretch of time and space is known as slow violence, another concern of postcolonial eco-critique. About what Rob Nixon has talked about in his book Slow Violence and Environmentalism of the Poor. So this slow violence is not visible or tangible. Even the effect of it is not immediate, but it is inevitable. It works in the form of pollution of our environment. And the modernization or development is accelerating the process of this slow violence. So these are the areas of concern where the intersection of post-colonialism and eco-criticism can contribute both. Last but not least, in such a scenario where degradation of the environment become a global concern, the idea of eco-cosmopolitanism comes into play. First, understand what cosmopolitanism is. Cosmos means world and polis means self-governing political entity. Now, as a resolution to this destructive notion, this eco-cosmopolitanism comes into play or may provide some sort of narrative to find out a solution. So it is about a worldview. It is an ability to engage with a different people and culture. In a cosmopolitan vision, Ulrich Beck argues that cosmopolitanism is a necessary response towards a global crisis like climate change. So it is like, should one be concerned about his own life, his family, his country, or should the circle of concern has to be expanded to humanity, where one can respect or have solidarity toward every form of life, irrespective of boundary or nation, where one can think from a global perspective. For example, a natural disaster or calamity or degradation of biodiversity of life form in Africa would be considered as important as in India. So it works on transnation. So in today's world, there are many things or strain that are pulling us apart, like gender, religion, race, caste, nation, etc. If this can be removed, we can have humanity. So this a cosmopolitanism under this banner reminds us to acknowledge universal solidarity or humanity. Now, why am I using this term under this banner of post-colonial eco-criticism is that when it comes to the concern of environment or environmental crisis, so that it would be regarded, the degradation of any country would be regarded with same importance or value irrespective of region, community, and nation. As pointed out by Ursula Hayes in her Sense of Place and Sense of Planet, the environmental imagination of the globe. According to her, the cosmopolitanism, the eco-cosmopolitanism, focuses on the necessity to think beyond one space, place, nation, region, in order to put a challenge against nationalistic political conflict of our environment. This is the main reason that is why I am bringing this under the banner of post-colonial eco-criticism. It puts a challenge against nationalistic policy of conflict over environment and consider a planetary ecology along with it, which must be addressed through cultural production to introduce planetary ethics. Now, as far as a post-colonial perspective concerned, there are many non-human species, or in the world of human, there are few community who are underprivileged, are overlooked in its conception of post-colonial discourse or in the discourse of environment or nature. For example, amaranth, AMARNTH, as mentioned by Christopher de Sille in Post-Colonial Amaranth. So amaranth is an edible weed, basically a species of spinach, has its important role as a source of nutrition in underdeveloped countries. It grows across Africa, Caribbean, South Asia, and in India also. So it has achieved its cosmopolitan status already. So I can say it has its diverse name and in diverse culture across these countries, but it is still underrated globally. In a post-colonial amaranth, I quote again. According to US National Science Academy 1984 study of the aberrant soils, it is only one of many underutilized food crops that are indigenous to this particular region, but neglected by researcher and policymaker, unquote. Not only that, it is even unlisted from the statistics of agriculture. So this cultivation of this particular crop or this particular species of spinach or its narrative in their culture, in the culture of indigenous people, may create a form of resistance against the monocropping that would be the cash crop in third world countries to meet the discourse of post-colonial eco-cosmopolitanism. So these are the areas where these two fields can contribute both. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidhu. Thank you thank you so much for deliberating upon the necessities of studying eco-criticism in the post-colonial context. Thank you for highlighting several forms of exploitations of natural resources in the name of development, which are leading to environmental degradation and ecological crisis. Thank you also for introducing the ideas related to eco-cosmopolitanism to our participants, especially the need to consider it in the post-colonial context. We will now take the questions from the participants. The first question is to Professor Chatterjee. Ma'am, yeah, so can you read this question, ma'am?
Yes. How will the work of work and activism of Greta Thunberg in recent times will affect the future of ecofeminism? That's a very pertinent question, Shoham Chamunto, to you. You see, I have two thoughts about this. In the sense that, you see, yes, definitely, Thunberg is being seen. She's relevant, she's voiced, she's forceful. She has a lot of relevance in the West. When she's trying to save nature, the wilds, or everything, definitely she will contribute in a very significant way to the activism of the ecofeminists of the West. But I beg to differ that she also probably has to know the realities of the third world, where probably similar kinds of activism will not work. The kind of argument I was also trying to make in my talk, that the perspectives would be different because the realities are different. So while Thunberg would be adding significantly to the activism part and to the praxis, I would say, of the Western ecofeminism, she would have to probably rework on the way she can apply herself to saving wildernesses or saving everything at the cost of the economy of the poor in the East. So that would be my take on Greta Thunberg. Definitely, but yes, I appreciate, like all other people around the world, her efforts and considering her age. So that's it.
We'll take the next question for Vidhu. Yes, Vidhu, I hope you can read the question.
A paradigm shift is coming in the energy market through the renewable source of energy. How can it ensure that coming years escapes emission? First, she argued it's not about renewable source of energy. It's about if an industry of renewable energy would be established by our state or government, what would be the cost of it on certain community or certain geographical region? We have to think out it first. So it would be great if a government or state find out any policy where it can provide the fruits of it to every section of society equally. In that case, it would be able to escape this elitism or the mode of elitist manner. Thank you.
Okay, so we take the next question for ma'am. Ma'am, there is an observation from the speaker of our next session. She would like you to give some source notes of Bart, Carson, and Austin. This is Brigitte Utter-Kornetsky. She is from Switzerland. Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your appreciation. And you see, definitely, when it goes into print, I'll be giving the details, ma'am. But yes, the primary texts, and there are page numbers of each, which I will definitely be attaching once I will work on them. And thank you so much, and I'll be listening to you. And I think also you will have a lot of interesting things to share with us. Once again, my
Yes.
yes.
Yes,
So
sure.
thank you.
Thank you, Brigitte. Thank you for your observation. The next question we take from our student, ma'am, for you. Yes, you can read the question.
Yes. The argument nature seen as woman has resulted in a higher persecution of it. Do you agree? Just a minute, please. Ajo, this is a very relevant question, I would say, in the sense that you see, both seem to be true. That seeing nature as a woman, in the sense that, as I was telling in my lecture, that this becomes a sort of, metaphor that, nature vis-a-vis woman has resulted in higher persecution, because the basic logic or the rationale is that the earth holds everything, nature holds everything, it's the provider, it gives everything. So the mother and the woman in form of a mother will provide, will hold everything, will have immense patience, and will also be used for procreational purposes. So in that sense, definitely there is expectation, as a result of which there is persecution. But you see, generally, this other picture is also true. There is greater respect and love. But Arjo, my argument would be greater respect and love probably, is it true for all circumstances? Yes, children do respect and love the mother. But when you talk of a family, it does not only include the children, it also includes, say, the husband. In rural India, if it's not a nuclear family, the extended family, where there could be a mother-in-law, where there could be a father-in-law, where there could be other, sister and brothers-in-law, do they give greater respect and love? In most of the situations, in reality, you see, she has to do all the household chores. She has to bear the children. She has to look after them. This is all unpaid. And 2 words of love probably cannot take away her pain. Her children only cannot be the source of, you can say, pleasure to her. When the kind of, you can say, pressure to perform is too much from the extended family, including the husband. And as if I think you read a lot, I understand from the kind of questions. You see, the socialist feminism or the the Marxist kind of ecofeminism, they argue that all this becomes unpaid labor. The little kind of respect and love that you are talking about, it is nothing, compared to the kind of grueling experience that a woman goes through. And this respect and love becomes only true in very ideal circumstances, in educated families, probably nuclear families, but not so much in rural India. That would be, my understanding of it.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Arjun, for the wonderful question. Next question we take for Vidhu.
Do you think eco-criticism on the is very accurate Marxist approach towards nature education? Yes, definitely it has its connection to Marxist approach, because the whole Marxist idea, if you think it from the perspective of capitalist production, yes, definitely it is a link to this idea of post-colonial eco-criticism, right? Because a certain type of mode of this capitalist tendency has its bad impact on few underprivileged people, or those who are tribals or Dalits. It is definitely connected to it.
Okay. Thank you. So we take the next question from for ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you see, deep ecologist, yes, deep ecology, Arnenes, yes, he wants preservation of nature, even, yes, it's basically, you see, it's not, I wouldn't say cutting out of human use of it, in the sense, you see that basically deep ecologists would believe that human beings are a part of the entire cosmos, and that human beings have an inextricable tie, and they are only, as I told you, a part, and they are not the very important, the most important being. So that is what the deep ecologists would say. That would mean a monkey would occupy the same place as a human being. Your next part of the question is, few economists believe not anthropo but androcentrism is the problem. You see, my take would be, you see, not all eco-feminists believe that. By definitely androcentrism, you would mean, yes, the male-dominated territory. That's what you are probably meaning too. But definitely, you see, in one aspect, it's true that males are, say, when I was giving you a reference to the case studies, male can go to certain territories and certain terrains, where women are probably incapable of, and therefore they become widely exposed, and they are capable of probably answering more, or probably comment more on certain kind of areas or certain kind of territories. But there is no such competition here. There is basically a fair kind of a stance that is asked for, where you see women's, I would say, smaller again narratives, smaller observations, the different perspectives, the neglected areas, okay? Like, say, the indigenous use of medicines, like, say, the indigenous use of herbal, say, the herbal cures, or say where women are involved, say, in solving problems in their own ways. You see, in rural indigenous India, say, there you see their contribution to the building up of the theory as well as the praxis is what is being asked for. It is not that the women are against men in making the theory. That is what I would say. It's only that the kind of areas that are being not looked into, the broader areas looked into by men, the smaller areas which are being neglected must be looked into and must make a wholesome theory. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. The next question we take for Vidhu.
It is tough to answer. First of all, if I could, I would definitely find a solution to this. We all are working on this, so I think the future time would be proper to answer this, because no one know how could we solve this problem. We all are working on it. Let's see.
So before I go to ma'am, we have two more observations from Bridget Kametsky. Uh, yes, Bridget says the Western dumping in so-called developing countries. So true. And there's another observation from Bridget. So do you have
Thank you, ma'am.
anything?
Thank you.
Do you have anything to comment on this?
Intruding all corpus from Western countries.
Yeah, it is in relation to your talk. So do you want to make any comment on this?
Now, it is quite evident that such kinds of things are happening all over the world. So, I think it is the high time that we should incline towards these cosmopolitan ideals to protest from every part of the world. As I told in my lecture, that any kind of calamities or degradation of biodiversity would be considered as in my own country like this. So this is the only way that we can protest such kind of incident from happening.
Okay. Okay. So we take the last question for ma'am. Uh,
You see, while I believe definitely that women are in some way closer to nature, not all women, not all women. It cannot be very homogeneously said that all women are closer to nature. But I definitely believe that women who are, I would again repeat and repeat that rural women who were closer to nature in the fields, in the mountains, gathering fuel wood, or say working in the paddy fields, or say say working say along with the men in the fields, so in very many ways, okay? Or say growing vegetable gardens, say they are people who are closer to nature, okay, nature than men are. And yes, in the urban homes also, if you definitely grow plants in your courtyard, if you definitely allow sunlight to come in, then you are closer to nature. Men probably, I argue that it's not that they do not have inclination, it's that they probably do not have time, and might be they are more in the competitive world more than women. Women are more sensitive, so therefore, they can get naturally closer to nature. This is one. The other is that the next part of the your question. So only they can save the planet? No, no. It's not that only women can save the planet, but they would be glad if their contribution is recognized and they can be equal partners in saving the planet. Somebody had asked me about Thunberg, that very young woman who is fighting with all her might. Her voice is being heard all over the world. So she will bring a difference. But you see, there are also men who are working very hard to save the planet. So both can do together. It's probably being very short-sighted, and it's not right to say that only women can save the planet. And nor are the ecofeminists trying to say that particularly. They are, again, I repeat, trying to draw attention to the fact that they are contributing meaningfully. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So we have the last question for Vidu.
Durable societies pursue growth as finishes for all programs that the community industry is on the rise. How to contribute to eco-preservation. See, Sophie,
There is a second part to this, Vidu. May I add that to the screen?
see, Sophie, there is another question.
Yeah, the second part.
After industry is itself regulated under the market regulation. See, the discourse on renewable itself has its own ambiguous points where it refutes its own ideas, and under this own discourse, the ideas of imperialism works sometimes. So in such a situation, I think only one thing that can help us would be the planetary ethics that works on the recognition of multiple domain of justice, where it focuses on planetary justice as well as a balance between human interest and at the same time non-human interest. So it is like another form of social justice as well as ecological justice. I think that would be the best way to uh, see this new liberal discourse, especially from the third world countries. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I thank all the participants uh, for their patient hearing and for putting forward questions to our speakers. And I also thank both our speakers, Professor Shrimshta Chatterjee and Professor Murmu, for making this session so engaging and for so kindly responding to the questions from our participants. We thank you once again and we express our deepest gratitude to you. Before I formally end this session, I would like to request our participants to be with us in the next two sessions of this conference. On 11th January, at 6:30 in the evening, we have a session with Bridget Ufer-Karnetsky, who is an eco-filmmaker. Her talk is titled From Earthworm to Elephant, an ethical journey through the rainforest of our minds. And on January 12th at 10 in the morning, we have a session with Professor Teresa J. May of the University of Oregon, United States of America. Her talk is titled From Eco-Theater to Eco-Dramaturgy, Theater, Climate Change and Civic Engagement. So ma'am and Vidhu, we thank you once again. Thank you so
for
much.
hosting this in so very meaningful way. Thank you so much. And thank you all the participants for patiently listening and asking us very relevant questions. Thanking once again everyone for inspiring us.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Vidhu. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.